All right. Hey, this morning we're going to go through the repository and see how things are organized. We're going to do a overview of what I have set up as far as configuration, infrastructure, actions, all of the above. The way that I build out my repository is my own belief systems and how things are structured together. So there's always going to be a choice. And before I show you mine, keep in mind that whatever works for you is probably the best solution. So getting into it, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the repository. Starting at the top, I've got, again, the name of the repository. It's my lab. I've got some folder structure that's living here. And then as we go down, what happens is I discuss my viewpoints on these types of things. I really believe that configuration and infrastructure should be two separated items. And inside the repository, I've done a really, let's say, directed job at trying to keep that. I want infrastructure and configuration to be consumable at their own level. And that makes it so that each individual resource, right, kind of like a Terraform module, somebody can come by, grab, and just start using that instead of having to redeploy and build my whole lab environment, which may or may not be useful for anyone else. All right, so under each one of my products, I'm going to configure, and I'm also going to have infrastructure pieces. The environment as a whole has shifted. The general environment that I demo across different F5 product portfolios will look like this. There's several components. Each one of these lives as an infrastructure or a code configuration option in the folders that live above. I may add things that I don't use on the day-to-day basis, and I'll leave those things as like ignore files that maybe I only do for a one-off demo and I don't need it all the time. So generally speaking, there's distributed cloud, there's Nginx, there's F5. All of this is built inside an Azure platform. There's also things like AKS, sometimes Azure Log Analytics, right? There's a lot of products and tools in here to demo, right? Generally, all F5 product portfolio. So the folder structure, for me, I've organized it alphabetical just because that's the way that I go, with the exception of the GitHub Actions. I need that at the top to explain how things are going to work. Almost everything in this environment is deployed via a GitHub action. The only thing that you may find that is not would be like, again, a one-off customer demo that I'm providing that I had to put in just to see if it would function and work. And it's not likely that you would ever see that unless I'm doing a one particular demo for that one thing. Otherwise, everything comes through a GitHub action. It's either going to do the action directly, like something for AKS, it may do that directly. Or it may kick off a job, and that job may do things like Terraform or Ansible or Kubernetes or Helm. It may do many, many things. So GitHub just in general creates this dependency tree. And what you're seeing here is the dependency tree of a deployment that I did recently. As I go a little bit farther down, you'll see the breakdown. So things like Argo, that uses only Terraform. Big IP uses Terraform and Ansible. And depending on what I'm doing in each one of the tools, it may come first or it may come second. It will make sense as you're trying to click through and see that stuff. A couple other tools that live in here is GoDaddy. I use that for my DNS registrations. So let's look at the first one as we go down. The first thing that I'm going to highlight is Big IP. In there, I've got some different solutions. So common declarations, telemetry streaming, you can read the rest of these in here. And then I also highlight the variables that are used. And the variables are important because you're going to need to know that you need those variables inevitably if you would like to use what I'm using as examples here. Some of those variables, things like passwords, usernames, host names, they're all to me considered sensitive parameters. So I'm going to keep those things inside GitHub secrets, right? That way they're not exposed and I'm not committing them into code. As you go to try to deploy something, you may see that. The quickest way to tell would be actually to look at the GitHub Actions file, and that'll tell you what things are coming in as secrets versus what things are possibly defined later on in something like that Ansible or Terraform. So I've got some stuff, and you can see Big IP, and then I've got Terraform for configuration, Terraform for infrastructure, and then I've also got Ansible for configuration. And again, depending on what I'm doing, I may run one tool before another. Obviously, if I have infrastructure I have to build, that's going to go first. So in this case, it would be like infrastructure and then Ansible because I need some baseline configuration. And then something like Terraform to put the day-to-day or day 2 configuration in there. So moving down, again, environment variables, what I'm trying to do in there. I try to keep these up to date as best as I can, but as I come up with new solutions or new customers that are asking for different kinds of requests, I'll throw them in here and hopefully I catch them all at the same time. So going down a little bit farther, certs, that's just for my authentication into XC. Again, that doesn't do anything without the password to unlock it. So distributed cloud, this is F5 distributed cloud. Some use cases I have in here, clusters, firewalls, origin pools. I have all kinds of just different use cases for XC. Again, certs, keys, passwords, all of these things are going to be environment variables. As we go farther and farther down, I'm just going to keep scrolling. Different use cases for each one. I like to demo a lot of Nginx product portfolio, and a lot of that does require something like Kubernetes in order to make it work. I'm using 2 versions of Kubernetes inside this lab. One of them is Azure's Kubernetes service, and the other one is F5 Distributed Cloud as a Kubernetes service as well. So there's a couple of those. You'll see those highlighted down in here. Networking, I got to have some networking infrastructure. Of course, that's the base for building anything on top of in any public cloud, with the exception of F5 Distributed Cloud, which has no obvious networking that I have to build. It's already structured for me. So in this case, I'm going to build some stuff for like AWS, which is not typically part of my lab, but Azure is. So I have both just in case, I have that one event that happens and I have to do a demo in AWS. I already want that infrastructure to be ready for me for landing networking, right? So that I can land an instance on it as fast as possible. So I've got some networking for both, even though almost all of my demoing is done in Azure. Nginx, different use cases. And then finally, I've got some services. I want to demo against something that looks real. So when I do my demo, I have a few different services that I want to highlight, maybe security features, authorization features, delivery features. A lot of those are actually redirects to public facing sites. That way I don't have to create it. And it also, looks like a site that somebody would see. There is some internal ones in here too, which you're welcome to take a look at. Those would be things for demoing an internal, maybe API or a WAF or something like that. So I've gone all the way down the page. And then what we're going to do is work our way kind of across the top. So as I look at issues, I don't have any issues that are in here. What I would use issues for, though, is if somebody has a problem, obviously, with some code that's living in there, or if somebody would like to see maybe a demo, or they saw some code and they want to see a demo and me do a recording of it for a weekly video, let me know, right? Leave it in there. That's what I would like to see it used for. That way people are interacting in the repository and people can search for things. Pull requests, I'm not accepting any pull requests at this point. If you do have an issue and you want to put let's say the fix in the issue, that's great. But I don't want to manage this as, a pull request problem thing. That may open up later on. I just haven't decided. Actions. As far as tabs go, I'm probably not going to show you anymore, so you don't have to see the writes and things in there. But the actions, I described this a little bit earlier. I use actions to deploy all of the infrastructure. So this is both my source control manager and my, let's say, CI/CD process. Now, a lot of mine is organized by code. So when something changes inside the code, the actions kick off, right? And then it moves and moves on. So one thing that we'll look at is actually, let's just take the last one. I've had, at this point, almost 1,300 deployments. So I've been doing this for a little bit. And you can see this kind of looks just like that picture you saw earlier. What I'll click through, though, is the workflow file, so we can actually see how it runs. So mine's going to run on pushes and pull requests. And obviously, I don't do pull requests. I just talked about that. The pushes, however, I ignore a couple things, and those are mostly pictures. That way, in the event I update the README file or the security file or the picture of the lab, I don't have to push a whole new pipeline through just to be able to update those two things. So it ignores those. Beyond that, everything runs. So I'm going to jump a little bit farther down and take the big IP example because I think that's going to be the most relatable for individuals that are coming to look at this. But the jobs run down, and then each job can have something like a dependency or it can run in front of it. So I'm going to jump down to the big IP one. So let's look at the big IP one real quick and see how this flow works. This is going to run on Ubuntu version 20. There are different runner OSs that you can choose. I'm choosing this one because I know it works. I tried 22 at one point and it failed, but I was probably just missing a package at the time and reverted it so I knew it would function. This particular one needs two resources. One of those are those cloud networking resources, and the other one is the big IP resources, right? So those things have to be up and available before this particular one can run. So in this case, I've got, are the big IP resources available? And I do a check. So this is going to check, make sure that my big IP is ready, right? And if you've never seen this before, there is a ready state on the big IPs to validate that. And then down a little bit farther, right, it's going to keep progressing. So Ansible configuration needs the infrastructure and it needs to make sure that these resources are available. So this particular one is going to run. It's going to install some packages. I have Ansible in here. I also had to install Jamespath because I do some manipulation, right? And we'll go through those things later on. The working directory. So the working directory just prints. So that way when it runs, I know, right, what folder it's in. Because as a runner runs, you're not actually in it. And sometimes it helps for debugging. I've turned off my linting. I might turn that back on. I left it off because I didn't want to lint every file. I do that in Terraform, but in this case, it didn't seem worth it. Just because every playbook would need to have its own lint. And then I just have a bunch of code debt for each one of them. And I wasn't sure that I liked that idea. So here's the run Ansible playbooks. In this particular one, I'm going to run playbook under playbooks. And at some point, I'll show you those as we move through the different environments. This particular one requires these variables. And these variables are the ones that I was describing earlier that are actually GitHub secrets. So they're not stored in code. They're not stored in Ansible config. They're not stored in, Ansible Vault. They are stored as GitHub secrets. So they're only accessible at the runtime and not accessible by any other means. Then as I go down, so Ansible runs, let's say Terraform is going to run. This one actually runs after the resource or after the cloud infrastructure is available. So it only has one dependency. So in this case, it would go build me the big IP infrastructure using Terraform. So this particular one, it needs, again, secrets, where the directory is. So you can see how that flows out, right? Any kind of steps that are in here, which is going to be things like which version of Terraform do I want to run, Terraform format. I'm a firm believer that linting should be put into place as part of the source control management. So making sure that the formatting is there, init, validate, apply. If you're not familiar with Terraform, those are, ways in order for you to, make sure all the modules are loaded, make sure that it's valid configuration, and then apply it means, push it out. Big IP, in my case, does both infrastructure and configuration. So you're seeing that in here. This was configuration with Terraform, or this was infrastructure with Terraform. This is configuration with Terraform. So this would build things like my VIPs and pools and profiles and WAF policies and iRules and all kinds of other things, right? Also, my Ansible stuff does that too, depending on what the use case is. So this is an example of the big IP workflow. How the repository is organized here. Let's go back and look at the code so this makes sense as you're looking through. So as I go to big IP, then it's organized by, let's say, orchestration or automation tool. In some cases, it's both. So if I go into Terraform, it's going to be configuration and infrastructure. If I go into Ansible, it's just configuration because I'm not using it to build any infrastructure. So in this case, it builds its way down. So let's go back up a folder and I'll do the Terraform one. If I was going to do the infrastructure like I articulated just a little bit ago in the GitHub action, this is my Terraform for building out the infrastructure. This is my Terraform for building out the configuration. My AS3 declarations, my fast templates, my LTM direct modules, right? All of these things break down this way. So as you go and you start to explore different resources that exist inside the repository, know how they're organized, know how I start to build them out, realize that there are things that you might not be able to find in there and it's probably a secret. And if you do see a secret, I expect you to put in an issue for a secret, a key, an IAM object, something that could be considered bad practice in logging into SCMs or storing into source control managers. So hopefully it becomes useful for other people. Again, this is my overview of the repository. I'll go into solutions and building out things in future videos, but I wanted people to know how my organization went and what it looks like when we're building these kinds of things out. All right, I wish everybody good luck. I'll see you on another video.